Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jan Rotmans. I'm a full professor in transitions. I have an exciting profession. I've been studying all my life change. But not ordinary change, but transformative, radical change. And I have a sweeping story to share with you this morning. And my basic message is to you, we are living in revolutionary times. If you don't realize that, if you're not living up to that, if you do not adjust to that, you're out of the game. I've been studying this for 25 years, even in times when people did not listen or did not recognize transformative times. My first statement is, we do not live in an era of change, but in a change of eras. And I show with you and to you some of, let's say, my research indicating that we are living in exceptional times. Because I will provide you some indicators underlining that we are living in times of revolution. Of course, every generation says that change is going on. My own father did that. But this time it's different, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not only studying the speed of change, but I'm also studying the scope, the magnitude, the impact of it. And these are really exceptional. I compared this revolutionary period to the last one we had. I called that the tipping point era, and that was the second half of the 19th century. That was, in particular in Europe, but also outside, an exceptional period of decades, let's say 4, 5, 6 decades, during which we had to face the Industrial Revolution, but we also built up our society. We were not very well organized at that time. So all the areas that we know of, if you look at healthcare, if you look at the education system, everything we started to organize. But the way we organized that was quite traditional in a high level, top-down, centralized way, and we are still faced with that. But overall it functioned quite well for about 100 years, but not anymore. So at that time, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that we started to produce on a mass scale was quite shocking. And that led to two different types of reactions. There were people who saw chances and opportunities and wanted to profit from it. But on the other hand, there was a lot of fear. So this is the transition to a way of production on a large scale in factories. The first multinationals arose. In my own country, think about Shell and Philips and Unilever. But if you look at the parallel trajectories, the similarities between the 19th century and these days, you see fascinating similarities. Have a look at this. We are now part of a digital revolution. Each global transition leads to a kind of a divide between haves and have-nots. There were people who profited from this global transition, and there were people who suffered from it. There was a large group who had fear for these machines. Do you recognize there is still a large group now that has a fear for robots? There was at that time a holy faith in technological progress, and we see it now again. Think about the whole singularity movement and singularity university movement. There's still that technological optimism. At that time, ladies and gentlemen, we had a long time of turmoil, turbulence, for decades. There was a definite cry for leadership and simple solutions. Do you recognize it still? The emerging populism, the cry for simple solutions, political leadership. At that time, we couldn't provide those insights and overview. And we are still suffering from it. There was a growing social inequality, and people like Marx warned for that. And these days we have Piketty, who does it in a more subtle way. So we can draw two lessons from this. Fear is a bad guide if you are living in a period of transformative change. And secondly, there will be a kind of a divide between people who will profit from this transformation and people who will suffer from it. But those people who acted in the most proactive way in the 19th century profit from it. There are differences, of course. If you study the speed and the impact and, let's say, think about the social media and the internet, it goes thousands of times faster than these days. But nevertheless, there are striking similarities we can learn from. So I'm following these transformative patterns again, and then I see the same kind of mechanisms in a more innovative and modern way. I see that our society is changing fundamentally. I see also that our economy gets a new basis, and again, there will be arising a new kind of power. In the 19th century, the nobility had the power, and there was an emerging group of citizens who were very well organized, the bourgeoisie, that took over the power from the nobility. I expect the same kind of mechanism. Each transition, ladies and gentlemen, is about a shift in power. So we are heading for a society 3.0. I don't know exactly the details, of course. I don't have a crystal ball. But you can look at the underlying transformative patterns, and that gives you a fascinating idea. Normally, I depict the transition in terms of an S-shaped curve. In reality, it's much more shockwise. But you can learn two things from this. It takes about 2 generations. And we started already 20, 25 years ago. And secondly, it goes in a highly non-linear way. So you start with let's say, a kind of a dynamic equilibrium in the first period. And then you are running into a more chaotic mode. And I call that a tipping point. And that is the period where I'm thinking we are at right now, here, in between two worlds. We come from that top-down, centralized, hierarchical society, and we are going to a more horizontal, decentralized, bottom-up, network, community-based society. And my mother of almost 80 still lives in that old world, but my children of 19 and 23 are fully part of that horizontal, decentralized society. And the point is, in that period, you are confronted with chaos. And today we need to celebrate chaos. Chaos means the opportunity to really change things. So if you, let's say, depict it in terms of from to, you see that we are running into a more fluid society with overlapping networks and communities, virtual, physical, what have you. And that takes time because it requires a change in the way we think, a change in the way we organize things, and a change in our daily practice. So, if you are part of a tipping point area, there's a lot to lose. Because you see many traditional big companies are suffering. You see that the government is looking for a new role. You see that there are many business and sector organizations that were initiated in the 19th century are suffering. And there's a lot of fear, like in the 19th century, among citizens. They don't trust it anymore. Because they are looking for, let's say, grasping that transformative change. And it's out of control, it's out of their hands. So this is fascinating, because chaos we need to celebrate. I hope that during the next 2 days, you will celebrate the chaos, not only in the bar at the evening, but also during the day. Chaos I'm coming from the field of complexity science. Chaos means the old structures and systems do not work any longer. The new ones are emerging. Try to see the opportunities. Try to profit from it. Don't be afraid. No fear, that's a bad guy. But there are 3 responses to change, and chaos. There's a kind of protest, there's a kind of action mode, and there's a kind of a demolition going on. I'm going to give you some examples. Well, it's a tragedy if you work for a Volkswagen. For good reasons, because Volkswagen is a symbol of the, let's say, German reliable culture. And you are in trouble if you are part, because it's still, let's say, a respected company, but they are in deep trouble. And if you want to drill oil and gas in a vulnerable Arctic region, then you will be confronted with massive protests for good reasons. And you better take care of that. If you are part of a big bank in Europe, you are part of a problem, but also of the solution. The big banks are confronted with, let's say, fintechs who can produce, let's say, on a smaller scale, can do it cheaper, can do it more efficiently. There will be a real shake-up in the financial system the next 10 years. The people who work within these banks are telling me that. They are telling me we are playing an end game the next 10 years. We are playing an end game. So I'm asking them, why don't you convey that to the outer community? You know what their answer is? Because the stakes are high. It's all about our position. It's about our status. It's about our job. It's about our income. And that holds for many, many companies, ladies and gentlemen. So this is another response, protest. Think about one of the most profound and persistent problems we are confronted with these days. The big number of asylum seekers and migrants. In the Netherlands, we used to organize that in a decent manner, organizing participation evenings. Well, they turn into a big mess. Look at these people. These people do not listen, they are only shouting, they are afraid. This is pure anger. But the point, ladies and gentlemen, is that most politicians do not tell you the real story. If we look at the problem from a transition perspective, and we look at the migrant problem, what you see is that they come from all over the world. There are about 60 million refugees now. And if you look at the underlying causes, you see there's a variety of them. There are political causes, social, economic, but more and more ecological problems. They are related to times of drought, let's say floods, and as a kind of a catalyst, climate change. And that brings us to the best guess projections, that where there are now 60 million refugees on the run, and only 0.5% of them comes to Europe, we expect that in 10 years from now, that might go up to 200 million refugees. And climate change as a kind of a catalyst. We expect in the Middle East in the summer in 10 years, temperatures of 60 degrees Celsius. So if you are a politician and you think that you can resolve this problem by creating a fence around Europe, you are misleading people. This is a structural problem that requires structural change and structural solutions. Action, that's what I like most. Many people all over the world, and also in Europe, are undertaking action themselves. If you look at the kind of cooperatives, if you look at the kind of communities, formal and informal, it is exploding in terms of local insurance cooperatives, energy initiatives. In Europe, there are more than 5,000 local energy cooperatives trying to generate locally their own renewable energy. If you look at healthcare, there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of concerned people who want to take care of their elder neighbor and people living in their neighborhood. If you look at city makers, all over the world, there's a group of well-organized, well-informed citizens trying to actively be part of city development. So we are measuring that. And if you look at the situation in my own country, the Netherlands, and if you look at the dark line, you see an explosion of citizen cooperatives. And you see in virtually every field. This is unfortunately in Dutch, but it is about energy, it's about food, it's about finance, it's about healthcare, it's about everything. So this is a new structure in our society, a new field where citizens take the lead. And this is the shift in power that I promised you. Let's say these are the well-informed, well-educated citizens organizing themselves and becoming a real active power. The relation between all of these responses is that we have created two separate worlds. We have created a system world where the system values are quite dominant, and then it's all about, let's say, effectiveness, efficiency, cost and benefits, return on investments, regulation. But people cannot live only in a system world. People also want to work based on trust, choice of freedom, quality. So the point is, where these two worlds overlapped in the 19th century, since the 80s of the last century, they grew apart. So we need to bring them back to each other. So we need to make the human world more part of the system world and vice versa. And that also holds for your own company. People who only function within the straitjacket of a system world are getting sick, literally. So this first part I round off with a conclusion that there is a kind of disruptive citizen trying to organize themselves and co-arranging their own living environment. So disruption is always connotated to technology and innovation, but it's only part of it's also part of our societal transformation. I'm going to jump to the economy 3.0 because I see the same kind of transformative patterns. And again, for the sake of simplicity, I'm jumping from two, let's say, the old guys and the new ones. Not that these are, let's say, right and wrong or vice versa. It's only about, are you equipped, are you prepared for the digital hurricane or not? And the funny thing, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps you recognize that, my own son calls me a real part of the old economy. He says that you're telling these people about transformations, but you're so old-fashioned yourself. Because you are still ringing a taxi company, you still don't use Uber. You still buy books in a bookstore. This guy is 19 years old. He sees the world through his apps. He's doing everything through his apps. And you know, the worst thing is if I enter a music shop and if I want to buy a CD, he says that is really old-fashioned. Music is in the cloud, and you need to pick it up from the cloud. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, it's going so fastly, you cannot even imagine. Look at the business model of Airbnb and Uber. You might say, these are the cowboys of the new economy. Well, I'm simply looking at their business model. Uber gives me what an ordinary taxi company cannot deliver. I know in advance the price and the route and the driver. I can judge him or her. And a normal taxi stands still for about 50% of the time. So Uber is changing the taxi system. But not only that, if you look globally about what's going on, you see a fascinating picture. Uber is changing the whole transport chain, because they are delivering all kind of specific services. And this is already happening in spite of all the protests going on globally, varying from super fast courier services to transport for companies, what have you. But now this all comes down to, let's say, the transformative picture. This is actually what Uber is doing. Uber simply connects in a digital way drivers with passengers. And that is so disruptive. The point is, within a couple of years, there will be an Uber for energy, for the building sector, for healthcare, for chemistry, for each and every sector will be affected by this digital disruption. You don't believe it? You will see it yourself within a couple of years. It is already happening. Underlying is the economic transition, majorly driven by the human-machine interactions. And a part of this is the Internet of Things, but also the emerging robotization. So I was in Japan, and there was a robot who tapped a beer for me. And of course, you might say, wow, this is not very cozy, but he or she does it in a very efficient manner, very, very cheap. I lately gave a speech on a healthcare seminar, and after me was the keynote speaker. That was this robot. It was about 40 centimeters, and he could literally let the people, well, shout and jump. And they are already being used in order to, let's say, stimulate elderly people. And the point is, from research, it is known that these people are not afraid at all for robots. Also, the younger generation is not afraid at all. You know who are afraid? We, our generation. That's the point. You cannot stop this. We need to use them in the most functional way. An ordinary Japanese family has already a couple of robots, using them functionally. This is the most widely sold robot in the world, the sex robot. And ladies, there will be one very soon for you in the male form. Don't be afraid. It doesn't turn me on, but apparently there's a growing market for it. If you want to do shopping in a number of years and you enter a supermarket and they know if you enter that, it's all data driven. They know all about you based on big data analysis. They know that you like fish. So you're entering that fish store and your mobile is ringing and say, well, here we have a special offer to you. It's about tuna fish. There's a recipe, there's a white wine with it, everything. My mother really hates this. Why do we need this? She is asking. My children love it. This is the personalized, data-driven way you will be treated. Think about our houses. They are really old-fashioned. Within a number of years, they are full of sensors and all the apparatus communicating with each other. This could be a solution for holding elderly people longer in a more autonomous form in their own house. This is already happening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the most disruptive apparatus that I know of, the 3D printer. Well, you can print with it virtually anything already. Parts of organs and guns and they are now printing in Amsterdam a medieval house. That's crazy, of course, because it costs about 2 million euros and it takes 2 years. But each first prototype is costly in terms of price. But this is a revolution because they are building this from bioplastics. And the point is, in Shanghai, they are printing already 10 houses a day. 10 houses a day. So if I were a part of the building sector, I would be deeply concerned or challenged. The point is, it's not so much about what you can print already with it. The deeper lying mechanism is that the way we are making things and who is making things is changing profoundly. So within a couple of years, you in your own community, if you have gathered together the right expertise and knowledge, can virtually make everything. So this is the reverse transition I started with. I started with that picture of a factory and the transition towards mass production. This is the reverse one. This is the transition to production by us, by the mass. So we can virtually produce everything in a unique manner, in a highly localized way. This is really transforming the manufacturing industry. We can virtually make everything behind our PC. Internet, ladies and gentlemen, was about the exchange of ideas and concepts. This is about the exchange of products. This will have a huge impact. So if you look at the unfolding picture of the new economy, it is the biggest challenge in 150 years. Because we are talking about, let's say, a multifaceted economy. We're talking about a digital one. We're talking about a robotized one. The new making industry. We're talking about a bio-based one, a circular one, a green one. Wow. I wish I was 20. I wish I was 30. I wish I was 40. Or even 50. But this is a tremendous challenge. The point is, like in the 19th century, the technological innovation changed our view on the world, and that is happening again. So we as consumers are also transforming. We turn into more autonomous, proactive prosumers and manufacturers. You don't believe this? There is a generation now emerging that is already taking this as a starting point. So these are your future clients. Or the other way around. You'll become the client of these proactive prosumers. So if I combine the first and the second story, in the first I was talking about disruptive citizens. Now I've been talking about disruptive technology and innovations. And if you combine the two, these disruptive citizens can be helped by the disruptive innovations to organize themselves in an even smarter and faster and better way. So there are so many transitions going on that you'll believe that I have a fascinating job. Because in each and every field I'm actively working on, and there's a lot of empirical research that we are doing all over the world. We see those transformations going on. If you look at energy, welfare, building, care, education, and so on, they're all looking for new orientations, new business models, in a completely different way. I'm going to zoom in now into a global energy transition because that's a real part of your activities and your work. If I look at this, and I was in Paris in December last year, and I looked at the climate agreement, and I think that is a historical landmark. Because I've been working within the United Nations for a couple of years, and that was on our way to the first climate agreement, the Kyoto Protocol, and that was already a hell of a job. But to get 180 or 198 countries on one and the same line, that is a real achievement. So the world has chosen for renewable energy, and the world has chosen for a clean economy. And the world has formulated sharp climate goals. And of course, we need to follow whether these countries will live up to these agreements and expectations, but it will be evaluated each 4 or 5 years, and there's a strong evolutionary character between it. The result, ladies and gentlemen, is that there is a kind of a global divide, and that it's also valid for you. You want to be part of the old economy? Okay, that's up to you. But then you turn into a dinosaur. So the old economy is still rooted in fossil fuels, the old linear economy, centralized. If you want to be part of the old economy, there's a high chance that you will die out. If you invest $1 in the old economy, it costs our society and economy $2 because of the harmful impacts. If you invest $1 in the new economy, it adds $3. In terms of contribution to innovation, job creation, and structured economic development. So it's up to you. You want to be part of the old or the new? Fossil fuels are now associated with financial risk. So it creeps into the heart of the London city and New York City. And there's a worldwide movement towards divestment in fossil fuel. There's a whole discussion on stranded fossil fuel assets. If we really are living up to the agreement in Paris, then we need to leave 80% of our fossil fuel reserves under the ground. That has tremendous implications for all the companies involved. But don't think, ladies and gentlemen, that the transition to a new economy will be easy and smooth. It will be a real chaotic battlefield. The discussion depicted in that S-shaped curve will be from fossil fuel centralized top-down to a more horizontal, decentralized, renewable-based, and we are again in between those worlds. If I look at a transition from my own field, then it's really a change in the way we organize, let's say the infrastructural change, in the way we think. That is our prevailing paradigm, our set of beliefs and convictions, and a change in the way we do these things in practice. And these are highly embedded. It's very difficult to separate them. And the most problematic what I learned over the past 25 years is the cultural aspect. It's very difficult to change the culture within an organization or a company. A transition actually is a power shift. So that means there is a dominant group that has the power, and there is an emerging group that wants to get that power. And it's unavoidable that there will be a clash between the group that has the power and the group that wants to get into power. So we call that a change in the regime. If I look at all the factors influencing that energy transition, I look at the macro level, the almost autonomous changes, the meso level at which we try to influence this, and at the micro level. If you see the pluses, they are, let's say, stimulating that transition to renewable energy. If you look at the minus, they are hindering it. If you look at things like the TTIP, that is apparently not very much stimulating the global energy transition. But there are lots of pluses, in particular at the micro level and the macro level. That means that we are heading for a new phase in that transition. So, in my conviction, we have reached the tipping point. That means three things. That means chaos, that means a battlefield, and that means conflict. And I show you some examples of each of them. Tipping point indicators. Look at this picture. Coal-fired plants are phased out worldwide. There's a decoupling of economic growth and CO2 emissions in many countries. The big European energy companies are in trouble. I'll show you that in a minute. Solar PV prices dropped by 80% in the last 7 years. There are countries in which the production of solar is already as cheap as the production of fossil fuels. And since 2013, more clean energy was installed than fossil fuels. Look at the current oil price. Look at what's going on. This is quite spectacular. And the point is, we don't know really whether the prices will go up or down. But what we do know is that there will be sharp fluctuations the coming years expected. It used to be a play between demand and supply. Relatively simple. Now it has come into a play, a battlefield in geopolitical terms, a fight between continents. And that makes it highly unpredictable and unstable. If you look at the Dow Jones US Coal Index, that's almost zero. We are phasing out coal all over the world, although still developing countries are investing in it, but it's an end game. If you look at the newly installed capacity, and you look at the fossil fuel installed capacity and the renewables one, you see that the latter is going up sharply. And for the first time in 2013, there was more renewable capacity installed than fossil fuel. So the question is not whether renewables will win this transition game. The question will be, how much time will it take? Another 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years? But it is an end game. That will lead to increasing conflicts between continents, between countries. If you look at the Ukraine crisis, it's deeply embedded in the gas reserves that we have. There are conflicts between the US and China and vice versa, between Germany and other European countries. But look at a response from one of the most influential and big energy companies in the world. Gérard Mestrollet, CEO of GDF Suez. He argued the speed by which Europe builds wind farms and solar panels needs to be delayed. This situation is untenable. It kills our business. But this is not the right response. You cannot blame renewables. You cannot blame wind and solar. It's a fact of life. You better adjust to it. Otherwise, you will be dying out. So Obama has said in his last State of the Union, the country that will dominate the clean tech economy will be the country that will dominate the world economy. And America needs to be that country. And while he was saying that, he was overhauled from the left and the right by China. If you look at what's going on in China, if you look at coal use that is sharply declining, also because of the many local protests, because of air pollution, but it is declining sharply. They said, this generation we want to provide with fossil fuels, but the next generation we want to provide with renewables. So if you look at the trend in renewables, apart from nuclear, but wind and solar, they are really on top of the world. They are already the largest producer of wind energy and solar energy worldwide. It's going that fast. It's unbelievable. So the global transition is not so much driven by climate or environmental or scarcity factors. It's much more turning into a geopolitical fight, a clash. It's about shifting power. And of course, prices play an important role in that. So that is a real energy battlefield. And the big energy companies are suffering from it. In January this year, there was an overall downgrade. Moody's puts 175 energy and mining companies on the downgrade, including Shell. And if you look at, let's say, who is surviving and not, I have a picture here of the most influential ones in Europe, and you see what they still produce in terms of coal and gas, and what they produce in terms of renewable. And that's still a relatively small amount. So there's no wonder that they are in problem. If you look at the contribution, they are still heavily investing in the old economy. And that is not a very sensible strategy. So what is happening now, if you look at, let's say, the drop in value in terms of stock exchange, what is going on? Look at the value of RWE, dropped by 90% since 2008. Look at the value of E.ON, 80%. Look at Engie, 65%. So if I look at the solutions coming up, we know that we need to massively invest in, let's say, energy efficiency. That is a key solution. But that's not enough. We also need to come up with radical innovation, doing things entirely different. Some solutions here, we need to invest in the built environment and make our houses and buildings energy efficient, if not energy neutral. We need to invest in electric transport. We need to invest in the energy-intensive industry. Finally, getting a more bio-based economy. So if you look at the building environment and the built environment, what is going on now in many countries is that we decouple these houses and buildings from the gas infrastructure. So by better insulation, you can reduce the amount of energy by 80%, and the remaining 20% you can generate in, let's say, a renewable way, by solar panels and, let's say, efficient heat apparatus. So we have already in the Netherlands 500 houses. We are scaling up into tens of thousands of houses. Technically, this is not really a problem. It's more a question of how you are organizing it. This is an example of ordinary houses, but they are decoupled from the gas infrastructure and they are energy neutral. And let's say one of the recipes is the better insulation, and you can produce that already in an almost fabric kind of manner. And we are doing that for all sorts of houses, big ones, small ones, old ones, new ones. It's really technologically developing fastly. This is an example of Sabic. That's let's say, dinosaur in terms of a petrochemical company. But they are working together with startups and enterprises on bioproducts. So they created what we call a green chemistry campus. And we consider that as the pearl of the new bio-based economy in the Netherlands. So what they literally did is they invited entrepreneurs into their laboratories, working commonly on bio-based products like biopolymers, bio-building materials, bio-natural colors. So they are working on radical innovation. They are working on the products for the new generation. They are working on new business models. And this is a nice example of a collaboration between the old and the new economy, because they really need each other. So to round off, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to you as a leader, as a member of that new society and economy? My statement is that every business model in every sector of each company is under pressure. I don't know of any company who will be safe for the next 5 or 10 years. Most companies that I work with or research are not really prepared. There's an extremely focus on the ultra short term. There's risk-avoiding behavior, there's fear for change, and quite a few of them are cumbersome and bureaucratic organized. And I understand that, because these are difficult times. And the margins are small. But the point is, if you are not prepared, you will be surprised anytime. So who will be the next Kodak? Kodak used to be for 50 years the leader, stable growth market. That was during the analog photography era. They invented themselves the basis for the digital photography. Some of their best engineers gave a presentation to the board of directors about the chances of the digital photography. And the directors were not interested at all. And within 10 years, they went down the drain. Within 10 years. We are researching companies, and this is unfortunately partly in Dutch, but we consider 4 types of companies. The transformative companies that are really well equipped to that transformative change, that's only 1% of what we investigate. The proactive companies, that's only 10%. The remaining is either active or reactive, and the reactive ones are about 50%. They will be in trouble. 3 out of 5 companies, is my projection, will die out in a tipping point phase. 3 out of 5. And not the biggest ones will survive, not the smartest one, but the most agile one, the most flexible, the most adjustive ones. And so each and every company needs to develop a kind of semi-permanent change strategy, looking for new clients from a new orientation, new kind of collaborations. And that requires a change in the culture and structure. And that is not easy, because you need to work on it externally and internally. So cooperating with niche partners, and you need, let's say, out-of-the-box thinkers and doers, fresh lookers, cross-thinkers, entrepreneurs. And there are, fortunately, successful companies. We have a company in the Netherlands like DSM who is permanently transforming each 10, 15 years. And it's part of their DNA, it's part of their genes. They reserve time for that. They are not looking for excuses. They take the most challenging but difficult route. They create time and space for that transformative change. And that requires a transition, ladies and gentlemen, within a company. And there are 4 phases within. In the first phase, you become aware of the fact that you need to transform. Then it becomes part of your strategy and mission. Then it becomes part of your DNA. And then it becomes fully, integrally part of your execution process. That might take 10 or 15 years. And there's no guarantee. And this is not an endpoint, because this paves the way for another transition. If I look at a building company in the future, I call it 3.0, that cannot focus only on building itself, but it needs to facilitate a diversity of clients with regard to other tasks, like helping them with decentralized renewable energy, telecommunication, interior design. But then you need to have on board people who understand the preferences of the clients. So you need social psychologists and not only engineers or process managers in order to do this. If you are an energy company of the future, you need to focus on localized renewable energy and also on energy savings. Not only producing as much as energy for your client. No, it's the other way around. But that requires a different type of competences and different kind of people. If you are part of a healthcare company, then you need to facilitate the clients. The healthcare companies now, they are delivering 100% care. But then you make people dependent. And you want to give them back as much as possible the autonomy. So that means a different kind of orientation, helping them with maintaining a network, using social media, with schooling and jobs. I am doing a big project with the port of Rotterdam, let's say, who is still heavily dependent on fossil fuels and petrochemistry. But you cannot earn a lot of money in 10, 20, 30 years from now with only container transport or petrochemistry. So how can you add more value to your goods? Can you upcycle electronic waste, for instance? Can you organize yourselves in a circle of about 100 kilometers to be part of the circular economy? Well, if you look at what's going on, this turns into a fossil mausoleum. You can go to that in 20, 30 years from now with your children or grandchildren. That's what happened with the Ruhr area in Germany. And if you look at the harbor of the future, it will be fully based on different forms of biomass, second and third generation. So what we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, to round off is stimulate the collaboration between the old and the new economy. So what we are doing now with the Port of Rotterdam is to invest in experiments in radical innovation between, for instance, the 3D printer hubs and the maritime industry, to steer the container transport by apps. So we are literally connecting those entrepreneurs and startups with the more traditional companies. And that seems to work quite well. So my conclusion is, companies that want to survive need a semi-permanent transition strategy. That requires leadership, it requires guts, courage, and because you need to anticipate continuously the changes around yourself. And my recommendation is threefold. First, develop a proactive change strategy. Second, invest in radical innovation. So not only doing things more efficiently, but doing things in an entirely different way. And third, because I know all the excuses, don't wait for the government to come up with new rules and new laws. Because I know there's a lot of complaint about inconsistent governments for good reasons. I share that with you, but don't wait for them. They are also in trouble and dealing with that transformative change. And if you are going, let's say, the rest of the day to other lectures and think about this story, don't say, well, that was a nice, good story, but don't do that. Think about this one. Everybody said it was impossible until somebody stepped by who didn't know that. And that was I this morning. Thank you very much.